Well, we welcome you to Cupertino City Hall. This is one of a series of town hall meetings that Cupertino is hosting on many topics of interest to residents of our town. And I know that there are electeds from other cities here, residents of other cities, that have particular concern about this topic. So tonight, we're going to be talking about air quality and associated truck traffic emissions, and things we, the Air District, have done to improve human health over time and what more we can do. I will tell you that the focus of this particular meeting on air quality doesn't mean that we're not talking about Lehigh in other ways. We had a meeting in December, specific to the truck traffic situation at that time. We had another meeting that was very well attended in July that focused on the county's process for a new permit that Lehigh is interested in getting. That goes to the county because the county is the lead agency. So we as the Air District oversee air quality in 9 counties in the Bay Area. And tonight we have a lot of very senior people from the Air District who have come down because they care about this. This is a major industrial facility in the Bay Area. 5 refineries often occupy our attention, but the cement plant does as well. This morning we were in Milpitas talking about odor issues in communities there from the large composting and other facilities in that area. But tonight we're going to focus specifically on air quality. So we're not going to answer all the questions you have about what's going on with the new reclamation plan and what state that's in. There will be other meetings for that. We are going to focus on air quality with this staff, which includes Jack Broadbent, our Chief Executive. It includes the panelists up here, Jerry Bovey from Meteorology and Measurement, T. Bowie from Engineering, John Maven from Compliance and Enforcement, Greg Nudd, our Deputy Air Pollution Control Officer, Karen Skolnick, who's Director of Strategic Incentives, and that means grants to help move along us to an EV future, among other things. We also have with us an expert staff, Elizabeth Ura, responsible for community engagement and rulemaking, Christina Chu from Community Engagement, Christine Wynn, Sarah Zanetti from Communications. We have several folks from Enforcement, Gary Lepardi. We have John Marvin, Robert Cave from Rulemaking. I hope I got most everybody, but you can see that the staff is here to be supportive of our learning about air quality impacts and how we can make things better. So we're going to talk now about the flow, and I'm going to hand the microphone over to Elizabeth Ura.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us here today. My name is Elizabeth Ura. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and the Rulemaking teams at the Air District, and I kind of just wanted to give a brief overview of how this evening was going to go. So first, we will have a presentation talking about a lot of the rules and requirements that are implemented by the Air District on Lehigh here in Cupertino. And then from there, we know that everyone was very interested and sent in a lot of questions that you wanted us to answer tonight. Unfortunately, we won't be able to answer them all, but we do have a panel here, and we will be trying to answer quite a few of those questions. We'll also be taking some questions from the audience at that time. So if you do have a question, please make sure you fill out a card and turn it in. The cards are located at the check-in table right when you walked in. But then after that, that won't be the end to the question and answer session. You may notice all around the room we have 4 different stations set up here. One specifically that will focus on mobile source emission reductions, talking a bit about some of the incentive or grant programs that we have at the Air District. We have our facility permits table back over here in this corner, where you can ask questions about the types of permits and what's in the permits that we issue at the Air District. We have our air quality complaints over in that corner, where we have our local inspector over there, and they'll also be able to answer questions about how to file a complaint and the complaint process at the Air District. And then over here, we'll have a table staffed by our monitoring staff talking about air pollution monitoring. So if you have any very specific monitoring or any type of measurement questions, you'll be able to talk with staff directly there. So we're hoping to at least have 45 minutes to an hour at the end of the presentation and the more formal panel so that you'll be able to interact with Air District staff and get all your more specific questions answered. And so if we'll try and answer as many as we can, definitely.
Instead of going to the stations, right?
We'll try and answer as many as we can, but we do want opportunities for you to be able to interact directly with staff and ask more specific questions.
I don't look in the hand when I've asked everybody, and nobody wants to take my cards.
If you have cards with specific questions, please turn them in at the front table and we can look at them there if you have questions. And so for Air District staff, could y'all please raise your hands, all the Air District staff that are here? So we have folks throughout the room. Most of them are either wearing our very stylish blue polo shirts and or have name tags as well to help identify who's with the Air District. So also please feel free during the question and answer period when you're going to the stations to flag down any Air District staff if you have questions. And just one more thing on logistics, just as a reminder, emergency exits over here and over there, and also the restrooms are to either side in the lobby there. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Greg Nudd to start the presentation.
Thanks, Elizabeth. My name is Greg Nudd. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Policy at the Air District, and I'm going to go over kind of an overview of Lehigh and its interactions with the Air District. First, a little introduction to the Air District. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we were the first regional air quality agency in the country. We have a 9-county jurisdiction as indicated on this map. We're governed by a governing board of 24-member elected officials, city council and county supervisors. The total size of our jurisdiction is over 5,000 square miles. We have been granted by the legislature the authority to regulate air pollution from stationary sources. The authority to regulate mobile sources, such as cars and trucks, lies with the California Air Resources Board. So the extent to which we influence emissions from mobile sources is primarily through our incentives program. We have over roughly $100 million a year that we put out in clean technology incentives. About $50 million of that goes to heavy-duty trucks. And so this is to replace old vehicles with new, cleaner vehicles and with zero-emission vehicles where those are available. The other thing that the Air District does that may be of interest this evening is that we provide technical comments on CEQA analyses. So when we talk about the land use permitting that needs to be done for the changes that are underway in Lehigh, the Air District's primary role in that is to review that and to ensure that the information about the air quality impacts of the project are accurate and complete, so that when the county makes their decision, they're making it based on a complete data set. So as I'm sure you all know better than me, the location of Cupertino is in an unincorporated area, and location of the facility is an unincorporated Cupertino at the end of Stevens Creek Boulevard. This facility quarries and crushes limestone and other raw materials in a kiln to produce clinker. The clinker is then cooled, ground, and mixed with gypsum to produce Portland cement. And the facility also produces and sells aggregates. Air District Regulation 9, Rule 13 was specifically for this facility. It set standards for nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, ammonia, total hydrocarbons, and some specific toxic air contaminants. It also requires certain stack configurations and continuous monitoring, and places fugitive dust mitigation control measures on the facility. This rule reduced nitrogen oxide emissions by about 42%, filterable particulate matter by about 10%. We have concerns still about the non-filterable particulate matter from Cupertino's cement kiln, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Hydrogen chloride emissions by 70% and mercury emissions by 93%. So this is where the new stacks are, and you can see the before and the after. So the disadvantage of a configuration like this is that those stacks were dispersed, hard to control, hard to test, and much closer to the ground. In this case, we've got one tall stack, which improves with dispersion and gives us 1 point to measure all these pollutants coming out of the kiln. This is the monitoring that we have done and are currently doing at Lehigh. We're monitoring total hydrocarbons, hydrogen chlorides, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, mercury, particulate matter, and then there are bag leak detectors as well to make sure that the particulate matter control system is working. We've also done some perimeter monitoring for dust and traffic. EPA conducted a 1-year study on hexavalent chromium. The Air District conducted 3 years of monitoring in Cupertino for the pollutants you see listed there. And the results were consistent with other urbanized areas in the Bay Area. The monitoring system that the Air District has right now is designed to characterize emissions on a regional basis. And what we've learned recently, especially in studies that we're doing in places like West Oakland, is that air pollution concentrations can differ significantly just within a couple of blocks. And so what the Air District is undertaking now is a mobile monitoring study to monitor for nitrogen oxides, CO2, ozone, black carbon, methane, and particulate matter. And that mobile monitoring platform will drive every road in the Bay Area at least 20 times. And so we'll be producing maps at very fine detail, very high geographic resolution, showing how the air quality differs on a block-by-block basis. And this will help the Air District identify hotspots, and then we can turn around and figure out what's driving those hotspots and address it either through regulatory or enforcement or incentives. In addition, we recently adopted Rule 1118, risk reduction for existing facilities. This is the most stringent air toxics rule in the state of California. And what it requires is we've set a risk action threshold at a level that's 1/10 the level in the San Joaquin Valley and less than half the level that you find in the South Coast area, Los Angeles, Orange County. And what that requires is that for every source of toxic emissions in the Bay Area, they have to do a comprehensive emissions inventory, make sure that we've got the latest and greatest data. Jerry Bovey's folks have been doing a lot of stack testing to make sure that that information is accurate. That data will be shared with the public for y'all to review it, and then we do a health risk assessment based on that data to establish the current health risk from the facility. This lays out the timeline for Rule 1118. By the end of 2019, first quarter of 2020, we will have, I think we skipped a line here. So the second quarter of 2020, the HRA will be complete and the facility will be reviewing it. And by the end of 2020, we will finalize that HRA. And that has a health risk assessment. Thank you. And what the health risk assessment does is it follows a standard California protocol that translates the emissions coming out from the stack to what people may be breathing, and then compares that with health risk levels. And it's designed to be protective for the most vulnerable populations. And so based on that analysis, there is a threshold that every facility needs to meet. And then they come back to us with a plan for how they're going to meet that threshold. And so I know that y'all have been involved with the health risk assessment process at Lehigh in the past, so there'll be an opportunity for a very detailed technical review of the health risk assessment itself. There'll also be an opportunity for a very detailed review of the plan that Lehigh must undertake to reduce those health risks. Moving on to compliance and enforcement activities, we've had it looks like 8 NOVs between August 2015 and the present. An NOV is a notice of violation. And what that means is that one of our inspectors has found Lehigh to be out of compliance with a particular requirement. And you can see the requirements here. And according to our data, and the enforcement folks can talk more about this if you're interested, all of those violations were corrected expeditiously. Next steps. Lehigh has, for particulate matter is not considered a toxic air pollutant under California law. But what we know from the latest data is that particulate matter probably has the most health impact of any pollutants coming from any facility. And we have three concerns about particulate matter at Lehigh. First, there is the fugitive dust. There's the emissions from the tailpipes of the trucks, and then there's the emissions from the kiln stack. So the kiln stack is pretty well controlled for what we call filterable particulate matter, which is something that you can catch in a filter. And so the Lehigh has a bag filter system that's very similar to like a HEPA filter that you might have in your house. But what happens is that the pollutants can pass through that filter because they're not solid at the high temperatures in the stack. So when that pollution comes out of the stack and cools, it condenses into particulate matter. And so we're very concerned about condensable particulate matter from Lehigh. The condensable particulate matter emissions from Lehigh are quite high, comparable to an oil refinery. And so we are currently working on a new regulation to further strengthen air pollution controls at Lehigh to address those condensable particulate matter emissions. So the dust control is also an issue, and we review that every 3 years. The quarry expansion is a concern to us, and we will address that through our review of the county's EIR. And then I spoke earlier about the Bay Area-wide study to determine block-by-block pollution. That has begun. The study has begun, and it will take, because we need to cover the whole Bay Area, 20 runs on every road. We expect that to take about 2 years. We'll be publishing data from Richmond by the end of October, and you can kind of see what that looks like, and then that will be fleshed out for the rest of the Bay Area over the next couple of years. When we talk about heavy-duty trucks, the 2008 CARB truck and bus rule will require that engines be traded out with the latest air pollution control technology before the end of 2023. In fact, the legislature has put a requirement in that those trucks have not upgraded. They will not be able to renew their registrations. The Air District Incentive Program also can further reduce emissions ahead of the CARB requirements by incentivizing the purchase of cleaner vehicles ahead of when these rules go into place. And the Air District has another initiative we call Diesel Free by 33, and the goal there is to eliminate all diesel pollution in the Bay Area by 2033. Now, in the case of the heavy-duty vehicles, the heavy-duty trucks that are in use at Lehigh right now, there is no current commercially available technology to replace that's zero emissions, but a number of companies have introduced some models that are showing promise, and the folks over with the Mobile Source Emission Reductions Group can give you some more details on that. So I think now we're going to move on to the panel questions, and I will hand it back to Mr. Sinks.
Thank you so much. There are a few people I failed to acknowledge before. Rainey Chang, who's newly our Director of Meteorology and Measurement. There you are. We have two other of our Deputy Air Pollution Control Officers here, Damian Breen and Wayne Keno. So we have quite a showing tonight. I'm sitting in this seat because I've been on the board for a few years now, representing all 15 cities of Santa Clara County. And I happen to be vice chair of the 24-person governing board. And we don't come out and do inspections on facilities. Our job as a board is to adopt policy based on science and good judgment and balancing economics and in the interest of protecting human health. So that's what I'm doing up here tonight in particular. So I have a few questions. We had a large number of questions that came in, and I'm going to look to staff to bring up cards and try to sort them into categories, and we'll see if we can get some of those in as well. But I'm going to kick it off with this. There have been a whole number of questions on dust. So what are we doing to control dust from Lehigh? There's the quarry blasting. There's piles of waste that are put up from time to time, the stuff that doesn't get turned into product. We also have truck traffic, and as my city staff will tell you, we often get complaints from bikers that even after our sweeping, continue to find debris on the road. So what's our plan for improving dust mitigation?
So first, let's talk a little bit about, again, fugitive dust and where it might be. And
Fugitive dust means?
Fugitive dust means that it's particulate matter that is either windblown or coming out in a fugitive way, in that it's not coming out through a stack. So it may be windblown, it might be coming from the tractors, it might be coming from the tires on the trucks. So that's fugitive dust.
What about the 44 dust collectors you have?
That's not fugitive dust. That's particulate matter that's coming out of a set and regulated piece of equipment. So we can talk about that later. So we have a fugitive dust control plan that we negotiated with Lehigh back in, I think, 2010. And this fugitive dust control plan is a comprehensive plan to control or mitigate dust from whatever types of fugitive sources that there are out there. So it could be material transfer stations or points. They have a lot of conveyors, and they have transfer points to different conveyors, and so that all has to be controlled. They have material transfer points such as Sorry. How's that? Better? Please, just let me know. So there's other material transfer points where, a rail car may be dropping material into a bucket below ground, and that's also a transfer point. So there are many ways that fugitive dust can be generated. The fugitive dust control plan is there to try to mitigate those different points. We have the quarry, and I think a lot of you have seen the quarry blasts, which can generate quite a bit of dust, visible dust from the valley floor. So the fugitive dust plan is actually addressing the blasting, the quarry blasting. Currently, it's only regulating the blasting and eliminating blasting when there's winds averaged over an hour that are greater than 25 miles per hour, and it requires that the material that's been blasted to be wet, and so that it can't be wind blown. But what we're doing, if all things go the way we think, and the Title V permit, which is now under revision, it should be renewed or may be renewed within the next few months. And if it is renewed, we have a fugitive dust plan that's going to be amended, and it will have a very strict, or I wouldn't say strict, but it has a 3-year study for quarry blasting built into it. So Lehigh will have to be studying and proposing, or not proposing, but studying the quarry blast, and how to further mitigate the blast fugitive dust operations. So that'll be a 3-year study coming up. We also have, of course, our inspectors out there, and he's out there 1 to 3 times a week, maybe more. He can see the facility from the valley floor also. So he's also looking for visible dust, and that's a way for us to regulate and enforce visible dust standards. So we can't eliminate dust. That's impossible. Sorry, we just don't have the ability to completely eliminate it. But our regulations do require that dust be contained and not be excessive. So I'm not talking about the Title V.
Hey, excuse me, but we really need to keep the flow going. So here's the deal. We want to use our time well. We want our experts to answer on this panel the general questions that that the whole audience will appreciate. We are going to have time at the end, if we use our time well, to have, and we'll have some of it certainly, to get specific questions answered in the corners of the room. Okay?
Yeah. Lastly, there's a lot in the dust plan, but lastly, I'd like to talk about the track out provisions. And track out means that's material that accumulates on the tractor or the truck wheels and can fall onto the pavement, and it can create dust when people drive over it, right? So the Fugitive Dust Control Plan has track out provisions to one, try to prevent the track out from happening. So there's provisions that trucks leaving the facility have to be clean. Their tires have to be clean. Now they can be washed down because they have a truck wash. For the cement trucks, they can vacuum off the top portions where they fill the cement and if material, and cement is a very fine material. If it's not vacuumed off, that can create a lot of dust on the roads. So that's another method within the Fugitive Dust Plan that we try to control dust. And there's others, we can talk about that later, but I don't want to spend all day.
Very good. So I know a lot of folks in the community have real concerns about the reclamation plan that Lehigh has planned to file. And Greg talked about that in some detail, but can you go into more detail about when that reclamation plan comes through, exactly what the role of the Air District is? Do we get to dictate everything? How does that process work, and what sort of input will our residents have through the Air District's input to the county?
Thanks. My understanding is that it will be the county's decision to, it's a land use decision that the county needs to make, and that the county will be conducting the EIR. The Air District will be assisting the county on the air quality analysis and the greenhouse gas analysis in the EIR, so that when it is presented to the county supervisors for a decision, they will have complete and accurate information about the air quality impacts of the project. I expect that there will be significant impacts from trucks. I think that's probably going to be the driver of air quality exposure from the reclamation plan. My last understanding on that is that the county said that the application from Lehigh was incomplete, and so they have not begun the process of putting together the EIR just yet.
It came back already. Just in case you want to.
Please.
I'm trying to help you people, you just don't realize it.
Well,
You
yeah.
don't have all the information. It's not coming out, you're not giving it out. These people need to know that. okay? I work with these agencies every single week, so I know the latest and the greatest, and I'm working with Senator County to get that.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay. What do you expect the process to look like? The Air District then gives a report. It talks about air quality control under CEQA, and then you're saying at the end of the day, the county could find their overriding concerns and ignore the report from the Air District, or what?
The way I expect this to play out is that the county will hire a consultant to do the air quality evaluation, and they will release a couple of documents. First, the notice of preparation, and then we will weigh in on the notice of preparation, make sure that all of the aspects that are related to our work are covered in the EIR. And then they will prepare and release a draft environmental impact report, and we will review the draft environmental impact report and ensure that the technical work on air quality is accurate and complete, and we will suggest any mitigations that we think would be necessary and helpful for to minimize the impacts of the project. Now, the county then can decide what to do with that. In the end, it is the county's decision whether or not to approve the project.
Okay, thank you. As you discussed, we've made substantial reductions in toxins from the facility. So that 93% means we've taken the mercury down to 7% of what it originally was, correct?
That's correct, but there are other toxins to worry about. That particular rule was focused on mercury because mercury was a big issue and is a big issue from this facility.
So can you give us a little more on the new rule 1118 the board implemented passed, and talk specifically about what positive impacts it would have on human health when fully implemented?
I can talk generally about how 1118 works. Tu is the lead engineer for this facility, and she can add to my remarks. But we want to look at all of the toxins, and not just mercury, not just hydrochloric acid, not just benzene, and arsenic, vanadium has been raised as well. And so we want to look at all of the toxins that are coming out of this facility, make sure we have accurate and complete understanding of what those emissions are. And then we're going to go through a process where we translate what's coming out of the stack to what people are breathing, and then what that impact is going to be on their health. And so this rule has set a very stringent standard for impact on health. Just to give you kind of a comparison, if you live in suburban Bay Area, your estimated health risk from breathing the air, just from what's coming from the trucks, the auto body shops, all the things that come along with living in a populated area, the average cancer risk for due to air quality in the Bay Area is around 600 in a million. So what that means is it's a probability of 600 in a million for a person exposed to that level of pollution for 30 years to get cancer. So it's just to give you a feel for what kind of background risk is. So what Rule 1118 says is that no individual stationary source can have a total health impact greater than 10. So just to give you a feel for how stringent that rule is. So you compare 600, which is just kind of background suburban exposure, to no more than 10. And that's where we went with Rule 1118. And that's why the refineries sued us. But Tu can tell you some more about kind of what we've learned about toxics and where we are specifically on Lehigh.
Currently, we are collecting information, getting source tests, getting source test results so that we can get better data. And we're also collecting each individual source of toxic potential emission locations so that we can conduct the health risk analysis for Lehigh. And Lehigh is scheduled on the first phase. The health risk evaluation is underway. We are currently collecting information. As I said, the information, once we receive the information, getting more detailed toxic emissions, source by source, then the district staff will conduct the health risk analysis for Lehigh. And as I said, Lehigh is important, and we take them seriously. So we are putting Lehigh on first phase, phase number 1. And the timeline for it, as Greg mentioned, we are anticipating in 2020 the facility review health risk to be public comment sometime in third quarter. Then you know that at that time you might have a chance to comment and review the document or our finding for Lehigh. Lehigh currently, the Kiln has actually reduced a lot of risk because it was raised, so more dispersion. So the risk for the Kiln is actually very low at this point. However, we are collecting data for other fugitive emissions, which might have a control over the health risk. The dust collection, baghouses, or fugitive dust emissions. The driving risk for Lehigh right now is mostly arsenic. Secondly is benzene.
Thank you. So let's move on to particulate matter. We know that particulate matter, based on new studies that have come out in the last decade or so, is known to have real impact on cardiovascular and respiratory health, as well as neurological and reproductive health. We've talked about major sources being dust. That we talked about that in the first question, what you all call fugitive dust. We've talked about the kiln and the condensable particulate matter, and there's trucks. Can you go through each of those major sources and drill down one more layer and talk to us about what could be done?
So John spent quite a bit of time talking about the fugitive dust. So I'll talk a little bit about the stack. The kiln stack, as I said, has, I think Lee had some numbers here. We were at,
The kiln.
yeah, well, we were on PM from the kiln. It was over 300 tons per year, right? No, 400 tons per year, which is huge. I think it's comparable to the entire Chevron facility. Just to give you a feel for the scope of, this was 2018. 400 tons of particulate matter. And that makes it by far, you know, it's definitely in the top 5 particulate matter sources in the whole Bay Area. And the majority of that is this condensable PM that I was talking about earlier. And Jerry can talk a bit about condensable PM, kind of flesh that out a little bit.
Thanks. Well, condensable PM, the way we classify particulate matter, it's based on how you actually measure it. And it's broken down by filterable particulate matter and condensable particulate matter. Most of the controls that are installed at Lehigh are actually designed to control filterable particulate matter. Condensable particulate matter, as Greg said earlier, is particulate matter that is existing in a gaseous or vapor state. It's chemicals that, when cooled to ambient conditions, condense and agglomerate with other chemicals of similar nature to form particulates in the atmosphere. These particulates are typically always considered to be less than 2.5 microns in diameter, very small, which means they're inhalation hazards. You can get into the lungs, get into alveoli. I won't speak to the public health problems associated with them here. As far as how we determine that, the methodologies that we use, we usually use a filtrable particulate methodology combined with a condensable particulate methodology. The sampling train itself maintains a temperature at which condensables pass through a filter and go to the back half of the train, where they then cooled, as you would get in the atmosphere, to ambient temperature, and then they condense out in a sampling system that we then can take back and analyze. They're further partitioned as far inorganic condensables and organic condensables, and I know that's getting a little bit too technical probably right now, but basically what that means is organic materials, you know, like what your body is made up of, carbon-based materials versus inorganics, acids, bases, salts, things like that. That's how we measure them. That's how we define them individually. In the case of Lehigh, like Greg is saying, the condensable particulate fraction is much, much higher than the filtrable particulate fraction. We see fairly low levels of filtrable based on the controls that are there. So it's something that we want to address going forward to try to see if we can't do something about these condensables, which...
So we've been looking at the test results that Jerry's folks have provided and doing some engineering, trying to figure out what's driving these emissions so that we can come up with the best control strategy for that. So that rulemaking is underway right now, and you'll be hearing some more about that soon. On the particulate emissions from trucks, I think I'm going to hand that off to Karen to talk about what the options are within the Air District's toolbox to reduce particulate matter emissions from trucks.
Sure. Is this on? Okay. Thanks, Greg. So I just want to start by saying that you've heard a lot about the Air District's work to regulate the facility as a stationary source. That's primary responsibility of the Air District. As far as emissions from trucks and mobile sources go, primarily that's the responsibility of the State Air Resources Board and the federal government. But that said, our agency for more than 25 years has recognized that mobile sources contribute greatly to the emissions and health impacts in the Bay Area. And so for that reason, we have been developing incentive programs, which 25 years ago started with $4 million and have grown over time. Last year, we awarded about $100 million, and this year we have a similar amount of funding to award to projects to clean the air. The way our programs work is essentially entities, agencies, public agencies, businesses who are in compliance with regulations from the state primarily, they can apply to get cleaner engines or cleaner vehicles ahead of regulations. So these would be, we call it surplus emissions. And again, last year we awarded $100 million, and this year we're on track to do that again. In terms of Air Resource Board regulations, again, even though we don't regulate those, we do advocate for stricter standards. So we work very closely with the Air Resources Board. About 10 years ago, 11 years ago, they did pass the most ambitious requirements in the country. Our federal government is working to try to lessen the state's ability to regulate above and beyond federal standards, but the 2008 standards went into effect, and there was a slide earlier that showed that those standards were phased in over time, and probably for the majority, if not all of the vehicles, the on-road trucks that operate in and out of Lehigh, those would need to be fully compliant if they're not already by the end of this calendar year, meaning that they have to have a 2010 engine or cleaner. And this engine is about 90 times lower in PM than the prior year standard. So again, they're getting very clean. And vehicles at this point, even though we don't enforce them, any vehicle that doesn't have this engine won't be able to be registered starting in January if it's one of the larger fleets. And actually, you don't have to be that large to be a large fleet. For the ones that own a single vehicle, again, the regulations are phased, but it's such that by 2023, all of the on-road trucks in the state of California will have to be this cleaner standard. My understanding is that the state is now doubling down and looking at potentially further requiring cleaner engines, but what that would mean at this point, it's not possible to have a cleaner diesel engine. At this point, it would have to go to either natural gas or purely electric. And that's something that we do also advocate and do a lot of work with manufacturers to incentivize them and to work with them to develop, again, cleaner technologies. And in this case, it's full zero emission. And one of the last things I want to mention that was on the slide is a campaign that was launched about a year ago. It's called Diesel Free by 33. And again, this is an effort that it's not just incentives, which I work in, but many different folks in our agency that are here in the audience who could also speak to you about it. It's an effort that is working to help transition all of the equipment, mobile sources and stationary sources that use diesel to get them off diesel, because we've heard about the negative health effects from diesel. We're not able to do it for all of the kinds of equipment today. Some of the technology, again, needs to be developed, but for example, we started with light-duty cars. The Bay Area has the highest per capita adoption of electric vehicles, and I was very impressed in the parking lot to see that Cupertino is actually one of the areas that you have definitely signed on ahead of our adoption of diesel free by 33, so thank you. We want to do what Cupertino and the Bay Area have done with light-duty cars for all of the different kinds of equipment. Again, backup diesel generators, heavy-duty trucks, marine vessels, cement trucks. So it's something that over the next 15 years, even though the equipment is very clean from the emissions point of view, we want to continue to do better. So that's something we're really excited about.
I believe we have, thanks to Air District grants, we do have EV buses roaming around the San Jose airport, as well as a fleet of Goodwill trucks in part of the Bay Area, right?
Yeah, that are being tested right now.
That are being tested.
Yeah,
So those are
11 of
being
them.
heavily subsidized effectively through our grants, right? So a follow-on question, maybe we'll go to the lightning round here. For that ACLIMA study, that we're going to drive over every road in the Bay Area 20 times and take emissions, how will that help us during the reclamation plan as the Air District responds in the CEQA process? Will it be done in time for that? And how will we deal with vulnerable populations near schools? That seems to be a common question as well.
So there are a couple of ways the ACLIMA study will help us, this mobile monitoring study. And you know, the timing of the reclamation plan CEQA process is in flux and out of our control at the Air District, but I'm guessing this is not something that the county is going to put on a fast track. I would expect this to take a while, knowing how CEQA goes. So I would expect that we would have some results from some places in the Air District, and we already have some results from Oakland. We'll soon have results from Richmond, and I think what we're going to see is kind of a repeating pattern, right? Where you have a lot of truck traffic, you have hotspots for particulate matter. And so I think we'll be able to use that information to inform our comments, to help bolster our comments on the CEQA analysis that the county's doing.
Certainly Foothill Boulevard will light up.
I
We're
don't want
expecting.
to, make any
You don't wanna
predictions about what the
okay.
data would show, but it would not surprise me if that were the case.
So a question about greenhouse gas emissions. The cap and trade bill came down. The Air District quarreled a bit with the state on this. What role does the Air District play in regulating greenhouse gases from this facility?
The Air District had its ability to regulate carbon dioxide taken away by the state. So we have no direct regulatory authority over carbon dioxide for facilities that are in the cap and trade program. And this was a deal that the legislature made in order to get the 2/3 vote it needed to get cap and trade through. So right now we are putting together a comprehensive carbon dioxide strategy for the Bay Area. As you know, Director Sinks, the Air District has set very aggressive goals for carbon dioxide reduction by 2030 and 2050, and we're putting a roadmap together to figure out how to get there. That roadmap will say this is where the pollution is coming from, and these are the public policy interventions that can be undertaken to meet these goals. Some of those public policy interventions are going to be within our authority, and some of them are not. So we're tracking cap and trade very, very closely. What we have seen, at least on the refinery sector, is that it doesn't seem to have had much impact on actual emissions. And we haven't seen significant reductions from Lehigh either. I know they are looking into some options, though, to reduce their emissions. The cement kilns have a particular problem in that a lot of the CO2 comes from the process itself rather than the fuel. Typically, CO2 emissions are a result of fuel burning. In the case of Portland cement manufacturing, there's a significant component that is also from the process itself. And
It's
that
part of the chemical transformation
Yeah, exactly.
from limestone to cement, right?
Yeah, and so the calcining, that will be difficult to address.
Are there, just to follow up, and I believe there are companies working on greener cement, either by sequestration in formation or other chemical processes. Is there any hope there for those of us who care about greenhouse gas emissions?
One of the things that we funded with our climate grant program this year was an effort by Marin County to incorporate green cement into the building code. So one of the barriers to the use of green cement has been just kind of the mechanics of working through the building code to make sure that it's an option or it even goes so far as requirement. So I'm very hopeful that process will offer us a pathway to improve the market share of green cement in the Bay Area.
And what is green cement?
Green cement is a replacement for Portland cement that has a lower greenhouse gas footprint.
Okay. What is it going to take to shut the plant down? You're killing us. So many human lives lost. What authority do we have? We have economics. We have to balance things. How would you answer a question like this?
I can say that the goal and the position of the Air District is that we are here to minimize the impacts of industry on people's health, and that is our goal. The experience that I have seen is that the board is very cognizant of the need to allow for continued economic growth while protecting public health. And so that's the balance that we strive for. And but when it comes to stringent regulation, I have worked at the state level and in a different state. I've worked at the federal level, and now at the local level. And I can say that the Air District Governing Board here in the Bay Area is by far the most aggressive in protecting public health that I've seen anywhere in the country.
So if we were to attempt to pass regulations that would effectively shut the plant down, what would the result of that be? What would the outcome be?
The way that would play out is, well, first of all, we don't have the authority to shut a plant down unless it's posing a direct and immediate public health threat.
Okay.
And so what we often hear at the board, and we heard a little bit of this actually this morning when we were talking about composting.
Yes, we did.
If you pass this rule, it's going to put us out of business. And what we do as part of our rulemaking process is we calculate the costs of controls, and then we compare the cost of those controls to the estimated annual profit for the facilities that are going to be impacted. And through that socioeconomic analysis, we can estimate the job losses associated with the passing of the rule. And that is something that the governing board has to take into account when determining whether or not to approve that rule or to send us back to rework it.
Okay. Continuous emissions monitoring, remote sensing, 24-hour video feed, etc. What sort of new, and fence line monitoring potentially, community monitoring, what sort of new technologies in monitoring and measurement do we have that could help us and residents keep better track of what's going on? We have occasionally intermittent events, right, that come where people see a big cloud of something very opaque rising. How do we know about these events, and ought we be employing these new technologies to help us keep track of things?
Well, one of the things that I've been thoroughly impressed with the Air District, I've only been there for 2 years, and I can reiterate Greg's comments about the Air District and its forward-thinking, progressive attitude and how aggressive we are at trying to protect public health and reduce air emissions. They also address that through technological development and trying to stimulate technological development, both through grant programs and through initiatives that we try to push forward ourselves, such as fence line monitoring, better technologies for continuous emission monitoring from the facilities. These include some very high-tech instrumentation that we're deploying within communities in the near future for specific studies and for ongoing studies related to AB 617 and other community-focused activities. I can get more into the specifics of the types of monitors over at our station after this, because it's a very in-depth discussion. But suffice it to say for now, we are pushing the limits of what is capable for some of the fence line monitoring systems that we're deploying at refineries, and some of those could be transferable to other facilities, such as potentially Lehigh, potentially landfills, some other types of facilities. We need to see where the technology is taking us, because, like I said, we're trying to push the envelope on a lot of these things. That includes a lot of criteria pollutants, includes air toxic pollutants. It's kind of a brave new world right now in air monitoring, trying to do these things, and we are really leading the way, leading the nation and leading the world in a lot of ways in trying to push these technologies forward.
Do you want to talk about detached plumes?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the detached plume. So we were talking about condensables and how the gases coming out of the kiln can condense into solid particulate matter. And that's the plume that you sometimes see, and it's not on a regular basis, but sometimes you'll see a small bluish white, looks like a smoke coming from the Lehigh stack. And it's actually condensing. Usually our inspector says about 30 to 50 feet above the stack. And that's the condensable secondary plume. We certainly are going to be trying to control that. There's some methods that they're trying to use right now to control it, and that's their lime injection system, where they're injecting lime into the gas stream to control the chlorides. And ammonium chloride seems to be a part of this condensable plume. It's either ammonium chloride or sometimes it's been ammonium sulfates. So that would be reducing sulfur. But yeah, it's a very interesting phenomenon. We certainly want to reduce the formation of the plume, and certainly we want to reduce the visibility of the plume, because they're subject to a 10% opacity requirement. And what does that mean? That means that really it has to be, if you can just barely see it, it's probably okay. If it's a little denser than that, then it's probably in violation of our opacity requirements. So there are some things that they're proposing to do, or we were going to be doing in future rulemaking. So that'll be very helpful. As to that relating to some of these other monitors, it really doesn't have much to do with it, but it's something that is interesting and I think everyone should know about.
Great. So some residents report that the dust, not sure which source it's from, gets on cars and furniture and other things, this particulate matter. Any idea whether that's emitted by the trucks or by the kiln, or is it just the fugitive dust, and what can be done about it? I know we've talked some this evening about dust, but do we have any knowledge, if we do an assay, to try to determine what the source of that dust is that tends to get on cars and is hard to get off?
We have not done a study on that. Right now we haven't had the resources to do a full study. There was a study done over at the Rancho San Antonio, the Winnegar study. They indicated that they see some calcium materials within the particulate matter, and certainly that's not a surprise, because you're dealing with a quarry and cement facility that's very, very large, and you might expect a quarry that's manufacturing or coring for limestone, you might expect some material that has some calcium in it. So that's why we're doing making some of the efforts in the fugitive dust control plan to reduce emissions from the blasting operations, and we think that can help.
For these intermittent events, they could be blasting or planned outages or maintenance periods. We know that generally the facility is operating continuously, but is there anything that can be done to notify folks in advance of planned events that may bring up the air pollution levels, a quarry blast or something?
We have not talked to the facility, but I'm sure that could be something that we could explore.
Okay.
Right now we're not doing that.
Okay. This goes to the basic business of the facility. They mine aggregate and hard things from the quarry, so things that get put into the finished product as they extract the limestone. Are all the products consumed from the quarry, or are some of them being imported? And as for the products, are they used locally? Are they exported? What do we know about that?
Well, it's my understanding that the cement that's actually a finished product out of the facility, about 40% of it's used right here in the Bay Area. It might be even higher than that. They're quarrying the limestone, but there is byproducts from that can't be used, and that's aggregate material. And aggregate material can be sold for base rock and things like that. We experienced some issues with that, and I think everybody's aware of the truck problem that we had a number of months ago, where a lot of trucks were transporting this material over to Stevens Creek Quarry for final crushing. So yes, there's material that's going out, and there's material coming in too to make the finished product. There's gypsum, there's the fuel that's used to operate the kiln, that's pet coke. So there's a number of materials that are also coming into the facility by trucks or rail.
So a question about the toxins rule 1118. There are, over 2,000 companies in the Bay Area subject to this rule. Where does this cement plant fall in the phasing that you're doing for all the facilities? It seems like a Herculean task to try to impose this much more stringent level on all these facilities.
This is a phase 1 facility. This is a top priority facility.
Right.
Along with the refineries and some chemical plants.
Okay. Sometimes it seems when the facility does the work of monitoring and assessing, do we have enough oversight, or do we have the fox watching the chicken coop with regard to monitoring? How much are we on site with this facility, and how much, could you talk a little bit about our inspections and monitoring?
Well, we have an inspector out there, usually 1 to 3 times a week, more if needed. The inspector's out there to do compliance inspections, answer complaints from the citizens, and discuss operations with the facility and trying to reduce whatever emissions that we're trying to get reduced. So we're out there on a regular and routine basis. Now, they have their continuous emission monitors. Those are the CIMs, and Jerry was talking a little bit about that. And we do have a program to inspect those, and they have to submit some reports, and I'll let Jerry talk about how we go about that.
My staff, myself and my staff, have direct oversight of every emission test and all the CIMS data that come out of Lehigh. It's data that we scrutinize very, very vigorously. They must submit test plans to us for every emission source test that's conducted, for every device that's tested. We review those source test plans and approve them. We go out and observe as many source tests as we can, and we review every single report and every scrap of data that goes into those reports before we actually sign off on it. So we're making sure that proper methodology is utilized at every point, every step along the way when it comes to an emission source test. Same thing goes for the continuous emission monitoring systems that are installed on the stacks in the facility. We review all the plans for the continuous emission monitoring systems. We make sure that they're going to follow proper performance specifications for those devices and quality assurance, quality control on the data to make sure that every scrap of data that's actually reported back to us is accurate and has been properly vetted by both the facility and by my staff.
Thank you. And I think before we go to breakout, which we're scheduled to do at about this point, I have one more question. We obviously have a lot of engineers in the audience. They want to talk about how do we know from a pollution monitor whether this is the pollution monitors driving on the streets or the larger ones we have. Can you talk to us about how you figure out how much pollution is attributable to this source, that source, and the other source? So I know you all talk about it as source apportionment, and I know we've recently done some of that work in and around Oakland to try to sort out, is it from Lehigh? Is it from the Stevens Creek Quarry? We had some questions about that. Is it from the truck specifically? Would it help, for example, if we were moving things in and out via train, if there were options and choices available? How do we, if we are interested in improving air quality, and can we get to the point where we can say, this pollution this part of it is from this source and this part of it is from that source?
And I'll start, and then Jerry can add to my remarks. There are a couple of ways to do source apportionment. We usually use a combination of both. And the idea is you've identified an area with high pollution, so you have to figure out what's causing it. What percentage is due to what source? Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes there's only one source. Sometimes the fingerprint is obvious. There might be a particular chemical or compound or element that is unique to a particular source category, and you can find that through a monitoring analysis, through a chemical analysis. Sometimes it's more complicated. If you've just got particulate matter, where is that particulate matter coming from? How is it all mixed together? What is driving the exposure? And the way we do that is a combination of monitoring and computer modeling. What the computer modeling does is it looks at the estimated emissions. It takes into account the how fast it's coming out of the stack, what kind of loft you get from the temperature differential between the stack and the ambient temperature. It looks at the ambient, it looks at the local weather, it looks at weather fields over the course of the year, and gives you a picture of how that source is impacting the surrounding area. And so in West Oakland, what we did is we modeled everything and then laid all those models on top of each other. And we're able to, at a block by block level, determine what was driving impact from particulate matter, from diesel particulate matter at any given spot. I think the way we would do that in a place like Cupertino would be to look first at the impacts of the facility itself. And we'll be doing a lot of that analysis as part of the 1118 work. But there's also some methods, and maybe Jerry could get into a little bit more detail about how you could use monitoring data for source apportionment.
Well, Greg touched a little bit on the types of modeling. There's dispersion types of modeling where you take what's coming out, what you know is coming out of the stack, and the rate that it's coming out of the stack, and you're able to model based on the dispersive characteristics of that plume in the wind to determine where it might actually settle or where it's going to go. Other types of modeling are more receptor-based or trajectory-based, where you have knowledge of what's happening in a specific location, say within your communities, and then you try to look for certain chemical markers that can then be traced back to a specific facility or a specific device in some cases, based on the meteorology. Same type of thing, you're just doing it the other way. In those cases, we need very, very accurate data in the communities in order to be able to identify those markers and trace them back. It's actually, that is actually included in some of the initiative with the AB 617 monitoring that we're doing in Richmond. We're going to be looking very, very close at certain chemical signatures. It's something that could be applied to other communities potentially. We're using very, very sensitive instrumentation. The ACLIMA study that Greg was mentioning earlier is really something that is going to paint a picture for us. It's a tool in a toolbox. It's going to point us into a direction of where we need to go within the communities to try to deploy more involved instrumentation, more involved assets, staff resources, so that we can actually measure these things much more fine-grained detail, so that we can use that information to then track what we're seeing back to where it's coming from. It's something we're trying to get better at, something we're developing for AB 617. I think we've got a lot of really, really smart people working on the problem, and hopefully we'll be able to do something with it here in the future. So.
Great. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Greg, for the presentation, and panelists. We know that many of you have 20 times more questions than we were able to address. We hope we've hit the major ones for you in this part. Now, for the next half hour or so until 8:30, what we'd like to do is address particular and specific questions you have. Some of you have expert questions, and we haven't been able to get to all of those. So we're going to have staff in the four corners of the room answer those questions for you in smaller groups, and that way we'll get many more answered. So at this point, I think we can wrap this portion and look for anybody with an Air District badge on who can help you. Yeah, let's, Elizabeth will go.
Sure. I'll remind you quickly of the topics. If you have anything, any questions revolving around air pollution measurements or monitoring, that'll be over there in that corner. Back there is our air quality complaints, so anything about enforcement, notice of violations, complaint process, how to file a complaint, back in that corner. Over here, we have facility permits, so any questions on the permit for the facility or any rules that may apply to the facility over here. And then this corner, if you have any specific questions on grants of any sort or incentive programs, that'll be over here. And if you're not sure what question or what category your question falls in, just find one of us with the polos or the name tag, and we'll be happy to try and direct you. Thank you.
Now, where this is, then, where you are, is not the prevailing wind direction. It's from the northwest. It's opposite to where you are. The wind can shift and come from the south, suddenly in the rain situation that turns us this morning and be more susceptible to carrying particles.
Hence, this is the point where you finally have a lever, a place at least to put the fulcrum to bend things to our will.
We want to be lowering the pollution, and we want to work together with you guys to do it. So, I mean, I can spend my time talking about the monitoring data, but I'd much rather have us focus our energy on.
Oh yeah, I mean, we will regularly get large people, like you mentioned, auto body manufacturers, auto cars, coating shops, and you also have mom and pop coating shops.
And collectively, could I would think add up to a fair amount.
Yeah.
The state legislature just enacted SB 1, and we are building roads. If you go anywhere, you see roads are being built like crazy. So the thing about it is that as that road building happens, we've got two choices here in California. We import about 50% of our rock or aggregate from outside of the state right now, which is totally killing our greenhouse gas targets. Well, it's one of the things.
We're trying to use that as a method. What's actually happening with people? What health outcomes do they actually have that we need to be aware of and we need to actually include within our policy?
If you were exposed to this concentration of pollution for a lifetime, 30 years, for 30 years, right? What would your increased risk of cancer be? Okay, so that's what that 300 in a million is.
So then there's also about 35 monitoring stations spread out across the whole Bay Area that does meteorological and air quality monitoring of a number of different things. So that's designed to be spread across the whole Bay Area. There aren't any in Cupertino, but the nearby ones are here.
The answer is zero.
Yeah, and then let me keep going down on the list.
Why is there not a stationary kind of permanent monitoring somewhere around the quarry? Why do we rely on the data of the quarry, which you probably overlook, but it doesn't cover 4 days of the week.